So, Doki Doki Literature Club gently opened its door to its 7th anniversary, which is perfect because I have an excuse to talk about it for spooky month. I'm not the biggest fan of everything horror, and it's a little tricky to go into media I know is going to scare me or deeply unsettle me, but I think alongside the self-maturity, the very small amount of actual gore, and the dialed-down fanfare for this game today after the initial boom of it in 2017, my brain decided this year, of all times, would probably be perfect to at least watch someone play it. Doki Doki Literature Club is something I thought I'd never get into, let alone be completely infatuated by it. The complexity of the game, the theming, the talk and portrayal of mental illness, the state of the code and script, the music, the fourth wall breaking, all of it to completely throw you off and effectively unsettle you. This title heavily deserves its psychological horror tag and its heavy praise from basically anyone who's played it, including me. I've been down many rabbit holes with this game and seen many people talk about it, and I think, rather than talk about plot, talk about depth, about these characters overall, talk about just Monika. I take much more notice and appreciation in the little details of it, because there's a ton of detail that goes into this game that had to be thought about and intentionally done, and I want to haphazardly go about yelling like the village idiot about how much I love these little things that aren't so obvious from the scary needy girl dating sim. It's a specs video, you know how it is. When I mean that this game pays attention to detail, I mean the extensive research on mental health, the small things that happen in causation to another, even down to the detail of what happens to a body as it decomposes. There was heavy thought that goes into this stuff, and it's not even super integral to the game. They just thought to add it anyway. Because it's meant to lure you, to entice you, to unsettle you, to disturb you, and reality does that best, as it is based on your own understanding of the world. It hits close to home. Even in the glitches, there is detail. When you make a game, specifically a dating sim, a lot of the assets are already pre-rendered. The sprites/models, the system in which the path works and the dialogue tree, the way the files react to certain things happening, all of it is intentional. Which is why when the game quote-unquote glitches, it's even more interesting because everything feels like it has no control over itself. Every playthrough will probably have a new set of glitches. But in reality, everything does have control over itself. The glitches and scenes that can happen are all on a dice roll. You either have to do a certain sequence of events such as give Natsuki a poem that she hates, make a poem for Yuri 3 times, or give Natsuki 2 poems and Yuri 1 in that order, or you just encounter them randomly after Act 1. However you go about it, they are set to trigger in a roulette depending on the circumstances, some rarer than others, which I think is ingenious for the immersion of the game and how you feel this whole thing is glitched and out of control, or in the control of something else. And if you read the hidden notes and files alongside it whenever the game is going on, it just further amplifies the level of detail in the game. Right at the beginning of the chaos, when the unfortunate event happens, you know the one, there will be an error message behind Sayori to check the traceback in an attempt to fix whatever has gone wrong. A traceback is a file in reference to the program Python, which is a coding system that most of these games, such as dating sims, are made on. After your program encounters an error, this file will essentially show you what the program did to get to this error in an attempt for you to notice and look back over the code for any mistakes in your program. This then gets interrupted and delves into Monika's thoughts as she decides to delete Sayori. The fact that it even remotely references Python and actually gives you a traceback, and the traceback is part of the plot, is an extremely smart detail that I can't get enough of. It makes everything all the more realistic and immersive, and it breadcrumbs you into more files and details to read, either by decoding through base64 or sending through weird programs to get the character from some other game. You find neat and weird secrets from other files already there. It's like finding a cake that, when you cut into it, has like 1,000 layers. There's work in that. There's detail in that. Effort. I eat it. It creates this meta that can generally be seen throughout the game, knowing the program is in Monika's control, and is messing with the coding and computer files in real time, which has heavily inspired other games, such as Kinetopad. Can you tell I'm just gushing about this game? Other files throughout this game, after a bit of work, also follow Monika's thoughts as she navigates her administration powers to get to you, the player. One mentions how everyone was already messed up and how Monika chooses not to blame herself for the actions of her friends, at the time referencing Sayori's passing, and how all she did was quote-unquote untie the knot, sort of in the style of a weird Nikocado Avocado style character switch-up speech. It also switches back up once you start to hang out with Yuri more in Act 2, and she has a text file that screams her frustrations with the loops she's in and how it never leads to being with you, to being in a real world, how easy it would be to end it, and why, simply why, can't you just hate your only dateable options in the dating sim that she's stuck in. I love the message this brings overall, if you don't mind being tied to that chair and listening to me a little longer here. Monika assumes that because her friends are mentally ill, not perfect, and literally in her eyes not real and programmed by code, which, while understandable, says more on her own perfectionist all-or-nothing view, if she simply unties the knot, or accelerates and amplifies their mental/environmental problems, that by default you will want to go after her instead. Which, yes, the game has no route for her anyway, but you don't attempt to try and find one. You stick with who's there, and you feel bad and more sympathetic towards these characters. At least the game is hoping you do. This upsets Monika, because in her view, all these things amplified mean that you're unlovable. She's hoping they're so unlovable that either they don't pursue you, or you quite literally meet halfway to find some route for her. But mental illness doesn't do that, and it's it's an amazing message. Mental illness doesn't make you unlovable, it's something ugly and a truth that you have to face, sometimes for the rest of your life. Someone can still love you. I still haven't found any media besides BoJack Horseman so close to such an ugly, realistic yet beautiful truth that shows this sort of stuff in its worst light, how it harms you and other people. But it doesn't mean you're alone, or you can't find someone, or are incapable of love of any kind. I just think that's neat, and it's once again a great message in a very traumatic, very in-depth psychological horror. Other files lead to references to another project Dan Salvato is a part of, often disturbing images related to the game, or stories and texts that are either old projects or inside jokes for Dan and those who know him. You little bastard, you. The character files are interesting to mess with, because the detail only lies with two of them, Monika and Sayori. Monika is obviously important in that she needs to be deleted to progress to the end of the game. So what if you save time and delete her in the beginning? Well, Sayori, as the newfound president of the literature club, gains administration powers and therefore the sentience Monika was supposed to have. She then immediately freaks out and closes the game. She's then shown monochrome and in her slightly swinging death sprite with static ambiance if you open the game again. And another Easter egg pops up if you stay on that screen for 10 minutes. Sayori's file being deleted immediately skips to the same screen, which really entails how important both of these characters are in the game, as they are the two big defining points of the plot. In terms of character detail, there's a lot that can be discussed, and I urge you to check out the juice box for more character analysis because I entirely agree with all of his points as he pokes at the mental illness side of these characters. He's also incredibly talented as a musician, and you'll probably like his cover of Your Reality. Speaking of music, I'd lastly like to talk about the music and sound design because it adds onto the unsettling feeling the game provides. Right from the moment the game begins, it lulls you into this false sense of security and then breaks, much like the game. The entire game soundtrack, save for one or two tracks, are all based around different motifs of Your Reality, revealed to you at the end being personally sung by Monika herself, and as a result revealing that Monika is behind everything quite extensively, all the way down to implying the piano music in the soundtrack is her presence. It's also amazing how slightly distorting or remixing the motif can define a scene's tone and mood. Anything from stuff like the track Play With Me to Dreams of Love and Literature displays a playful, normal dating sim feel while still using the motif. Once the Act 1 climax is revealed, the track Sayonara has this eerie, twisted melody, crossfading itself from glitchy and horrific to serene, taking the motif and slowly haunting you, which is probably supposed to reflect the player and how you probably feel seeing the scene. There are other points of note with this motif, such as this version of the track Doki Doki Literature Club, where it switches up from its original key to a key lower for one line very occasionally. It makes it feel much more off, as if something is completely wrong. Because it is! This song happens in Act 2. The one after the death scene. It's reminding you, almost mockingly, something isn't right here. There's also the variations of other songs that add something off to the situation, such as Yuri's Confession being a very breathy, slowed, and distorted version of My Confession from Sayori's scene where she admits she has depression, as well as silence being powerful as a tool to unsettle, as it feels empty. The dissonance that silence brings feels like someone or something is watching you, waiting for the next move, and it's almost notable at the end of Act 1 and the end of Act 2. The music in this game feels like a toxic friend, making itself both the only comforting presence you have, yet absolutely taking advantage of your fears and insecurities for its own gain, whether intentionally or unintentional. And that sums up Monika in this game perfectly. I could talk about a bunch of stuff I haven't talked about. Theories, a bunch of things that are already in the game but you don't really see at first glance, more about the poems that go more in depth about what they could mean and who wrote them, but I don't feel like they have much of a place in a video that A, is already getting long, and B, is more about the small, not so obvious details I appreciate and not necessarily heavy set in the hidden mysteries and little point outs in the game. So maybe I'll come back to it. But ultimately, again, I always have to recommend playing Doki Doki at least once, if you're able to stomach triggering scenes, of course, because it's a very interesting experience that quite literally redefined the genre of psychological horror and has made its way into actual televised media because of its twist and popularity, inspiring games and works that inspire more works until it goes to this big domino effect. It is also terribly relatable for many people struggling with their mental health, and it hits me specifically because Sayori is very heavily represented in her speculated ADHD and canonical depression, both of which I consistently struggled with. Not to the extent of harming myself, of course, don't worry about that, but at the very least if I went unchecked to know where it could have gone if I had no support at a young age, that's scary to know, and affected me heavily when I first looked into the character. In conclusion, the scary dating sim is very layered and I love every little detail that goes into it, no matter how small, and the fact that I can take these details and learn more about the characters because of them, it's like a little treasure map into a bigger picture and it just keeps on giving. I highly recommend it. Thank you for visiting the Burrow.